Welcome back to Philosophy Roulette. Looks like we're gone live, so there's Philosophy Roulette 46, where we grab a random philosophy paper and read and review it. What did we do? We did something from Arcantanus the other day, and so let's just keep going down. It was this horizontal surgicality, as it were. Let's go get a different journal. Oh, look at all that new stuff. Ethics and Information Tech. Let's see what we got. Okay. Alright, so highlighted the shorter papers. It looks like these are nice and short anyway, so let's just grab some in here. Hopefully they're not all review. Measuring morality in video games research. Let's see. I mean, is there anything else even more fun than that? I don't know. Let's see. Oh, it's available. Alright. So, measuring morality in video games research. Good old 13-page paper. That looks good. So, here we go. Excellent. If you come by and stop by in the live chat, you can follow along by grabbing the direct link right out of the chat by typing in ! paper. And ooh, okay. I also first got afraid there for a second. It was just gonna be one wall of text without formatting. I was like, no. Alrighty. Okay. Measuring Morality in Video Games Research by Malcolm Ryan, Paul Formosa, Stephanie Howarth, Dan Staines. No abstract. We're not abstracting. Introduction. Morally significant video games for entertainment, education, and advocacy are becoming commonplace. The academic response to this rising tide has produced a wealth of analysis and a variety of theoretical models for the design of such video games. However, so far there has been little experimental validation of these models. One reason for this is the difficulty in rigorously measuring the moral qualities we are interested in. How do a player's moral values affect the way they play a game? And can playing a game influence a player's real-world moral behaviors? To find better than anecdotal answers to these questions, we need reliable measures for identifying correlations between morality and gameplay. To this end, we turn to the field of moral psychology. Moral psychologists have asked questions like this for close to a century and have developed a collection of psychometric instruments to answer them. I don't know if I've ever said psychometric. That seems like a fun word. The value of these instruments for game researchers is that they are standardized and reproducible, grounded in theory, and validated through empirical testing. While these instruments are not uncontroversial, they have much to recommend over the ad hoc method games researchers might otherwise use. Excuse me. In this paper, we review several of the myriad available tests described in the moral psychology literature. Rather than attempt to include every such test, we instead focus on these most relevant and useful for games research. To show how to employ these tests effectively, whoa, it says 26. One sec. If this is 26 pages, there's no chance I'm going to get through it. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my god. Yeah, it said 13 pages on the other one. Alright, scratch this. Why did it say 13 pages? Am I like my math bad? Yeah, 13 pages. Well, maybe they have some very... I don't like this journal no more. Maybe they have some very compressed font on their pages on this ethics and thing. So I can't handle that. I should have looked a little bit more closely when I opened it. I did one from the other one. Journal for the General Philosophy of Science. Oh, we could do one of these. Alright, let's just try that. I'm sorry. Blew a few minutes on the stream here. 5 minutes. Alright, now we're gonna have to get a real short one. See if there's anything really short. Nothing short here. Oh, that's because I'm not looking. 8 pages. Should methodological naturalists commit to metaphysical naturalism? You know what? I don't like you guys anymore. That was not cool. Way too long. Let's see if this is available. Alright. How many pages are we? 9 pages. That's what I like to see. Oopsie. Sorry about that. I was, got for toots there for a second, and, yeah. Okay. You know, mistakes were made. And that's okay. Mistakes get made a lot. Okay, so, no more abstract. Alright, 9 pages here. You can see here at the bottom. That's much more reasonable for a 10:30 in the morning philosophy paper. I mean, I could be going till 2 to be reading another paper like that. My apologies. The relation between methodological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism is a matter of some consequence for philosophers and scientists. Methodological naturalism, a thesis about the methodology of science, amounts to the claim that the method of science is empirical. Methodological naturalism then contains no explicit claim about metaphysics. Metaphysical naturalism, on the other hand, is a metaphysical thesis about the kinds of entities which actually exist in the world, and entails the claim that there is no God or any entity like him. The world consists of matter in motion, whose governing rules are ultimately explicable in terms of the laws of physics and or other empirical sciences. In this paper, we focus on the following question: could it be rational to accept methodological naturalism but reject metaphysical naturalism? The answer to this question is important because the majority of scientists and philosophers believe that methodological naturalism guarantees the ideological neutrality of science. Methodological naturalism, it is generally thought, is coherent with any worldview, and by using its methodology, people from different religious or cultural backgrounds can freely contribute to the advancement of science. It is widely accepted that the methodological naturalism can realize the ideal picture of value-neutral science. Hence, it is assumed by almost all scientific communities. Against this prevailing consensus, we shall argue that methodological naturalism has certain tacit metaphysical implications which have been widely ignored by the dominant view. Once we perceive its metaphysical consequences, methodological naturalism will no longer be able to count as a neutral methodology. We do not here argue in favor of any naturalistic or anti-naturalistic metaphysical worldviews. However, our concern is simply to demonstrate the non-metaphysical neutrality of methodological naturalism. Yep. Oh, welcome, Dung James. Yeah. I'm okay. We're all stuck inside, so we're reading philosophy. I have not seen this before, but feel free to follow along. In Section 2, we provide a brief review of the history of the debate. In Section 3, we study the relation between explanation and causation to see how methodological naturalism might constrain the domain of scientific explanations to the extent that they become characterized by ontological restrictions that exclude supernatural causes from explanations. This exclusion seems ultimately to be based on the acceptance of the principle of causal closure of the physical. Oh, I actually have a beef with the causal closure of the physical. It's a very, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, it is completely dogmatic. Everyone argues for this in a very dogmatic way, so maybe this paper will be after my own heart. I appreciate that. In Section 4, we classify different interpretations of the causal closure principle to determine exactly what the ultimate basic assumption of methodological naturalism is. Finally, in Section 5, we show that methodological naturalism not only has ontological presuppositions, but also has certain epistemic consequences. We conclude that methodological naturalism as a methodological thesis is interwoven with both the epistemic thesis of evidentialism and the ontological thesis of metaphysical naturalism. Okay, so we've got evidentialism and metaphysical naturalism with the as a consequence of the methodological naturalism. A review of the history. Since there are various versions of methodological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism, the first step is to provide a precise definition of these two positions, which clarifies what we mean by these terms. Right in the beginning, they're saying, look, methodological naturalism, Dung James, is that it assumes that like the methodology of science is a neutral methodology. It's compatible with lots of different worldviews. They're saying it's actually not so compatible. It makes certain metaphysical presuppositions, and we're going to find out exactly what the extent of the sort of the received neutrality of science not being so neutral is. So we're going to find out what the non-neutrality of the received view is in this paper, or that's what they say at least. There are various ways to define natural, but each faces certain problems. If we define it on the basis of scientific theories, such that we accept something as natural if and only if has been used in scientific theory so far, then we have to hold a conservative position as regards new scientific theories. Since new entities in novel theories have not been used in any theory so far, they won't be natural. On the other hand, if we try to define natural by appealing to its contrast with supernatural, or even its relation with natural laws or the laws of science, circularity would be unavoidable. So in the absence of any independent definition of natural, a common strategy is to make reference to known and uncontroversial examples of natural entities in order to adumbrate its meaning. In this manner, everything which inhabits time and space is natural, while entities like gods, demons, angels, and the Cartesian soul are considered supernatural. Plantinga reviews various usages of naturalism in art, literature, and epistemology, as well as different applications by philosophers like Moore, Dewey, and Quine. He asserts that it is not easy to find an analogy between these different interpretations of naturalism sufficient to define it. He considers that naturalism is an attitude towards the world and a high-level belief about it. When this attitude is directed towards the method of science, the result is methodological naturalism, which consists in the claim that in scientific explanation, only the use of natural entities is permitted. In other words, a scientific theory must refer neither to any supernatural entity nor to any revelational proposition, and everything should be explained by using natural structures and mechanisms. Okay. Metaphysical naturalism, as the ontological expression of the naturalist attitude, then claims only natural entities exist. Plantinga remarks that metaphysical or philosophical naturalism is even stronger than atheism, because besides God, it rejects the existence of any supernatural entity at all, including the Stoics' mind, fixed as absolute one, Aristotle's unmoved mover, and so on. According to metaphysical naturalism, therefore, it is not simply that supernatural entities cannot be used in scientific theories, they don't even exist. On some understanding of existence, of course. I'm not entirely sold on what the rejection of scientific existence is. It may actually still exist, but in some other weird way. But that's a very separate question. Since methodological naturalism concerns the norms and principles that govern scientific method, it seems prima facie that it would not commit itself to any metaphysical or ontological claims. So it seems. Someone could accept that reference to supernatural entities or revelations should be excluded in scientific theorizing, even though she didn't deny the existence of God or other supernatural entities, and may even believe in their existence. Yet some philosophers, such as these people, have held that there is a deep relation between methodological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism. Mahner remarks that a methodology which is not based on any ontological theory is just a set of arbitrary instructions. Every methodology needs an ontological theory in order to vindicate the possibility of grasping knowledge via that methodology. I've only been doing contemporary papers, so no, I'm not really doing the as it were classics, even though they're really only about 100 years old, not even with Camus. So, no, actually I don't read them. Which maybe that's a problem with me that I've only been doing contemporary stuff, but basically this is philosophy roulette. I pick a random paper and I just read it and review it. So picking somebody like with a big name like that is not my goal here. Although I'm leaving the future open. Maybe I will review something, a classic text one day. So this is the sort of like cutting edge contemporary analytic philosophy at the moment, although I do other stuff too. I will read like I read some continental things the other day, and I was almost gonna read something on video games or morality until I realized it was like 26 pages. I was like, I can't, that'll take me 2 hours, so I don't want to be reading for 2 hours. So yeah, so where were we? Mahner remarks on every methodology needs an ontological theory in order to vindicate the possibility of grasping knowledge via that methodology. In the same way, Torrance explains that when a person advocates a particular methodology for approaching a particular object, she will normally do so because she has metaphysical views about the nature of that particular object, about how that object relates to reality, and about the nature of reality within which that object finds itself. It's not really, I mean, we're discussing the paper at hand. I'm not really set up to like watch philosophical short vids. I'm just doing papers at the moment. It's not a bad idea. Again, it's beyond my scope as of right now. I'm just trying to review, read stuff. So this isn't a general discussion channel. Although, I mean, if you like the paper, please make comments on what's being read. Similarly, Hooke observes that the method is dogged by a pack of metaphysical consequences. A pure method, which does not involve reference to a theory of existence, is devoid of meaning as a proposition which does not imply other propositions. Forrest claims that having accepted methodological naturalism, metaphysical naturalism is the only reasonable worldview someone could adopt, whereby reasonable she means empirically grounded on or logically coherent. We can consider her argument as proceeding in 2 steps. She argues first that methodological naturalism is the only reliable and also the most successful methodology for discovering the realities of the world, and second, that scientific knowledge obtained using methodological naturalism expresses a naturalistic picture of the world, which among the different worldviews exclusively confirms metaphysical naturalism. Forrest emphasizes that the relation between methodological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism is not one of logical entailment, and views metaphysical naturalism as an a priori result of methodological naturalism. Lots of stuff raises important philosophical questions. It's like, yeah, pick your poison, my friend. Pick your poison. I'm just doing this right now, so it's like no philosophical shorts. I'm not interested. Well, not interested. I'm just, this is what I'm doing at the moment. I frankly, I just don't have the setup to watch a video alongside other people either. So, although that wouldn't be a bad idea for expanding the channel to like watch like a philosophy movie night. One of these days, maybe. While we accept Forrest's claim that metaphysical naturalism is a consequence of methodological naturalism, our claim in this paper is stronger than her conclusion that this relation is practical. Rather, we try to demonstrate there is a conceptual relation between methodological and metaphysical naturalism, such that one cannot rationally commit to methodological naturalism and simultaneously deny metaphysical naturalism. Okay, so this is the big claim right here. So we're going to see how they pull that off, because we're going to have some sort of understanding of rationality also. Okay, so methodological naturalism, explanation, and causation. Does the exclusion of the supernatural from scientific explanation have any relation with our belief about the causal role of supernatural entities in the natural world? In other words, could we coherently admit that supernatural entities have no explanatory power, and yet at the same time attribute causal power to them? Or would the elimination of supernatural entities from scientific explanations imply that we should not consider them as having any causal power at all? You know, Dung James. Yeah, possibly. I mean, I might set it up that we could have like a philosophical chat session one time, but then it's just sort of like an interview. You guys are throwing questions at me, I'm throwing them questions back at you. It's possible. I'd have to think about how it would work, but it's doable. But yeah. Well, I'm just gonna keep going at this. I can't think of it right now while in the middle of reading, but could try. Again, movie night would be cool. A bunch of like music. We could do like a musical analysis one time. Listen to the same sort of like musical art, work of art, and discuss it. Lots of stuff. Lots of stuff. To answer these questions, we first have to look at the relationship between explanation and causation. In almost all contemporary models of scientific explanation, the concept of causation has a significant role. Recognition of causal relations seems essential for any genuine explanation. David Lewis argues that an exponens should have an exclusively causal role in cases in which it apparently doesn't have a causal role. Either we are looking at it at an implicit form of causation, or we are wrong to think that it is an explanation at all. Wesley Salmon, meanwhile, remarks that an explanation of an event involves exhibiting that event as it is embedded in its causal network and or displaying its internal causal structure. Although some have maintained that there are non-causal explanations, some as geometrical explanations, the fundamental role of causal factors in an explanation is widely accepted, especially in scientific areas. You don't really do geometrical explanations in science, so, although maybe you could, but there is a very interesting argument I saw a long time, years ago now, about the packing problem of why bees choose hexagons for their hives. And trying to explain that is apparently extremely difficult because maybe it's one of these Nerlich or Routlinger, because you have to use the mathematical explanation of hexagonal hives as like efficient packing mechanisms versus a different sort of thing. So you have to use a mathematical explanation where and then where's the causal coming from in the physical world. So is it a mathematically caused structure? Is the question is why'd that happen? Okay. In addition to the importance of causal factors in providing an explanation, it matters for our discussion whether all the causal factors of an event have explanatory power and value. If we accept that all causal factors are explanatorily valuable, then the exclusion of supernatural entities from explanation requires one to believe they are causally inefficacious. Various attempts have been made to describe and formulate the criteria according to which an explanation becomes valuable and meritorious. David Lewis and Peter Lipton both consider that all phenomena can be studied from numerous perspectives, and that since an explanation is always about a particular aspect of a phenomenon, it is important for that explanation to be exactly related to the relevant aspect. Lewis asserts that when a scientific question concerns a particular part of a causal history, no amount of information about other parts of the history, however correct and strong, will be useful. Lipton also instructs his own approach for elucidating this point, considering the contrastive structure of why questions. Lipton says that when we ask why did P happen, we are actually asking why did P happen and not Q, where there are different options for the value of Q. Depending on which contrastive situation is posited in the why question, different explanations will be required. Lipton asserts that a proper explanation should be truly relevant to the difference between the situation that actually occurred and the contrastive situation which is supposed in the explanandum query. This point demonstrates that some causal factors are important and useful in an explanation, but not all of them. According to Lipton, it is the causal role of a factor in the history of an event that is not enough to make it useful in an explanation of that event, since in view of the main focus of the explanandum query, this historical factor may be irrelevant. Considering Lipton and Lewis's points, one can thus conclude that the exclusion of supernatural entities from scientific explanation does not necessitate refusing to allow them any causal role at all, but there are always causal factors which are not applied in explanation. But there is a subtle distinction which discredits the latter corollary. Recognition of a factor as powerless or irrelevant in certain explanation is different from claiming that the factor is essentially irrelevant in any explanation. Of course, a large set of causally efficacious effective factors may count as unimportant in a given explanation, and this doesn't mean that their causal role should be denied or neglected. But in the case of methodological naturalism, we are talking about the general concept of scientific explanation. When we totally exclude supernatural entities from scientific explanations, ultimately we deprive supernatural entities of the possibility of being exponential. As Torrance remarks, the theistic supposition that it is possible for God to have explanatory significance in some scientific inquiry is inconsistent with methodological naturalism. But it seems that anything that has causal role in producing a phenomenon can remain as an option for explaining some aspect of it. Therefore, one cannot rationally exclude a causal factor from all possible explanations of a given phenomenon. Hence, in order to be defensible, methodological naturalism must also include the assumption that the physical world is causally closed, namely the principle of causal closure of the physical. Okay, so, yeah, since all the explanation has to relate to something causal, and the supernatural doesn't fit with the causal structure of our universe because it would be miraculous, and then in some sense that would be an uncaused cause, then it doesn't fit in with the methodological history, the methodological causal history, the causal history of the methodology. Okay, so that's basically this is a causal historical argument saying that if it has a physical cause, it has to be the cause has to be physical all the way back, and since everything has to be physical and causal all the way back to the beginning of the universe, there is no space for some extraneous causal factor, such as God, to come in and have explanatory significance. Okay. Okie dokie. The causal closure of the physical. Several versions of the causal closure principle have been introduced, drawing on different aspects of the causation. Since the causal relation is transitive, all causally connected chains that finally realize a specific event should be counted as the cause of that event. Yeah, this is the all causally connected of that. So this is the This is the causal history right here. Claim the causally connected chains, although we can distinguish proximal and distal causes. Therefore, when we speak about causation generally and without constraint, we must include both distal and proximal causes. Jae-Kwon Kim defines the causal closure principle, according to which if you pick any physical event and trace out its causal ancestral or posterity, that will never take you outside the physical domain. That is, no causal chain will ever cross the boundary between the physical and the non-physical. Following Robert Garcia, we name this version of the causal closure, which restricts all chains of causal history to physical events, pure closure. If we suppose that non-physical factors can play a role in the chains of causal histories of a physical event, then we cannot generally exclude them from explanations of physical world unless their causal role is posited not as substantial as the causal role of other physical factors. So exclusion of supernatural entities from explanations of the physical world is rational only if we deny the existence of non-physical chains in the causal history of physical events or the significance of their causal role. In other words, for the acceptance of methodological naturalism, we have to suppose the pure closure principle. Yeah. Garcia whoa, I think that was thunder. Okay. Don't know if you guys can hear it. Garcia distinguishes between two interpretations of the pure closure principle as follows. A. Every physical effect E has a direct physical sufficient cause C in that C has physical properties P1 to Pn and P1 to N together are at least an insufficient. Alright, well, I don't know what in us cause for condition for E. And B, every physical effect E has a direct physically sufficient to physically sufficient cause E such that C has a physical properties P1 to Pn and P1 to N are together sufficient to bring about E. In the first definition of the pure closure principle, physical realization of a cause is important as physical properties are the inus condition for the effect, whatever inus must mean. Non-physical factors can therefore still contribute to the causation of the physical. Yeah, so it's the sufficient, but I guess there are direct physical sufficient. At least there's this at least in the first one, and so at least the physical ones do it. But the constraint of the second definition is stronger. According to it, realized physical properties are the only sufficient causes, so there is no need and no space for the contribution of non-physical factors. According to the first definition, although physical factors could be identified as causes, they do not need to be sufficient causes. Therefore, in physically similar situations, non-physical factors may determine the ultimate event. As a result, we cannot generally exclude them from explanations, so a methodological naturalist cannot adhere to this version of the causal closure principle. Arguably, then, for commitment to methodological naturalism, we have to accept version B of the causal closure principle, which denies the contribution of non-physical factors in the causation of physical events. Garcia names this version stringently pure closure. We should distinguish between the restricted and unrestricted domain versions of the causal closure principle. Some philosophers define causal closure on a particular physical level. They believe that causal closure is more plausible if we limit it to the microphysical or quantum level. In the unrestricted interpretation of the principle, we generalize causal closure to the domain of all physical realities and for all time. It seems that when we look at the range of issues with which science is concerned, we can conclude that the subject of scientific explanation extend from the microphysical to the macrophysical, biological, psychological, sociological, and cosmological facts, and to the phenomena of all past times. So if we want to restrict scientific explanations to natural explanations, we have to commit to the domain stringently pure. Is that... wait. Alright, so this is adding the domain to the stringently pure closure version of causal closure, which asserts that the domain of physical reality is causally closed and that non-physical factors have no causal activity on any level. Every weaker version of the causal closure principle leaves some space for causal activity by non-physical factors within the realm of the physical phenomena, which are the subjects of scientific explanation. Since, according to the domain stringently pure version of the causal closure principle, the natural and supernatural worlds are causally isolated, methodological naturalism implies that if there were any supernatural entity, it would be causally inefficacious in the physical world. This sort of ineffectiveness of the supernatural is clearly contrary to a traditional theistic account of God, which sees God as the creator and sustainer of the world. So it seems that the methodological naturalist cannot coherently believe in a God who acts in the world. In the next section, we will vindicate this claim. Okay, vindicate this. Methodological naturalism and evidentialism. As we have noted, as we have argued, methodological naturalism is based on the presupposition of causal isolation of the natural and the supernatural worlds. Here one may ask how a methodological naturalist could be justified in believing in the existence of any supernatural entity. To answer this question, we need to dig into some epistemological consequences and requirements of methodological naturalism. As a methodology of science, methodological naturalism aims at obtaining knowledge about the natural world. Therefore, it seeks to distinguish between reliable and unreliable propositions and related and unrelated evidence. Methodological naturalism implies that only those propositions that are reliable are supported by empirical evidence. Thus, Forrest claims that there must be empirical evidence for the claim with existential import, and any area of human thought, including religion, in which existential claims are made, is subject to the criteria by which existential claims are tested. Well, this seems like a very strong claim, actually. I mean, why does everything have to be so according to your like what exactly how our existential claims test is going to be contentious. So yeah, so I worry that it's a little question begging, because they have how evidential existential claims are tested matters here. In other words, methodological naturalism denies revelation and religious experience as valid sources of knowledge about the natural world. Well, that's are you denying them on this existential claim thing? Maybe, but then you have to define how you've done existential claims, and that is not a clear to rule out religious experience would be very difficult on a purely non-question begging ground. Okay, anyway, so the methodological naturalist is committed to the claim that scientific beliefs which constitute her scientific knowledge have been justified by her perceptual beliefs and their entailments. You see, this is see this right here? Like, justified by this. Again, how does that exactly work? We don't know. So the epistemological implications of methodological naturalism lead us to a version of evidentialism according to which the epistemic justification of a belief is determined by the quality of evidence that the believer has for that belief. Yeah, but you know, you go find a very religious person, they're going to tell you they see God in the world every single day. So, and when they say see, they mean see. So it's perceptual beliefs, whatever that might be. Anyway, in his famous paper, The Ethics of Belief, William... Oh wow, now it's raining very hard out there. In his famous paper, The Ethics of Belief, William Clifford argues that the evidence which can justify our beliefs is exclusively empirical, although he allows that our beliefs themselves extend beyond the boundaries of pure experience. Yeah, well, what does that mean? He emphasizes that these efforts to go beyond experience should be limited, and hence he introduces the uniformity of nature as the unique assumption that underpins and is required for forming justified beliefs. Okay, now this is getting somewhere. Uniformity of nature, what could that be? Clifford claims that the empirical and evidential methodology of belief justification results in practical certainty, so we no longer need faith. In the same vein as defenders of evidentialism, Feldman and Coney assert that the strength of evidentialism is that it can explain why clairvoyant-like beliefs, or any non-empirical, non-tested ones, are non-well-founded. So, because clairvoyant-like are miraculous and they just show up there ununiform in some sense. Okay. According to the standard of evidentialism, the doxastic attitudes of a person should fit his perceptual evidence. So what you see is what you believe. Meh. From this point of view, being epistemically obligated is equal to being epistemically justified, and conversely, just as relevant evidence obliges us to believe a proposition, the non-existence of any evidence compels us to deny that proposition. See, that seems very strong. I'm not going to deny stuff just because I don't have evidence. I could withhold judgment at that point. So this seems like a little too bivalent on this thing. Non-existence of evidence is not evidence for the negation of something. Thus, evidentialism excludes revelation and religious experience in justifying our beliefs and admits only sense perception as the source of evidence. So it can be viewed as an expression of the epistemic basis of methodological naturalism. Based on the above discussion, if we suppose that the supernatural realm has absolutely no causal role in the natural world, there will be no empirical evidence that confirms the existence of supernatural entities. Forrest expresses this point as follows: to become more than a logical possibility, supernaturalism must be confirmed with univocal empirical evidence, and such confirmation would only demonstrate that this newly verified aspect of reality had all along never been supernatural at all, but rather a natural phenomenon which just awaited an appropriate scientific test. Now see, this here smacks of you're just anything that was supernatural you're now calling natural. So it's like an arbitrary scope of you're calling anything natural that you want it to be. So this is a little ad hoc use of the name natural, the word natural at that point. Now the question is, a uniformity principle, how strong is that uniformity principle and how are you applying that? So we don't know, but it doesn't look like there's enough space here that they're going to flesh out the uniformity principle. So I'm a little sore about them not giving some more to that. Okay. Indeed, access to such evidence is in principle impossible, because if supernatural entities are causally isolated from the natural world, their existence or non-existence will not be reflected in the realities of the natural world. In the words of Torrance, naturalism rules out the possibility of recognizing that God has anything to do with the natural order. Hence, someone who accepts methodological naturalism has no option but to deny the existence of supernatural entities posited by theists. This worldview is exactly what at the outset we called metaphysical naturalism. It is important to point out that our argument concentrates on the transition from a methodological commitment to a metaphysical commitment, not from a methodological claim to a metaphysical claim. Indeed, our conclusion is not that there are no supernatural entities, but rather that upon acceptance of methodological naturalism, rejection of these entities is justified and endorsed. An endorsement of them, or to remain agnostic about them, is unjustified. So we reach the same conclusion as Forrest, although from a different route, in that we agree with her when she says, if supernatural causal factors are methodologically permissible, the cosmos one is trying to explain is a non-natural cosmos. Conversely, if only natural causes are methodologically and epistemologically legitimate as explanations, then only a naturalist metaphysics is philosophically justifiable. In contrast with her argument, however, we perceive an a priori and conceptual linkage between methodological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism. We have demonstrated that methodological naturalism comes with some supporting metaphysical and epistemological presuppositions, which make metaphysical naturalism the most rational, parsimonious, and coherent worldview. Conclusion. Our purpose in this paper was to prove that commitment to methodological naturalism necessitates the adoption of metaphysical naturalism. The main claim of methodological naturalism is the exclusion of supernatural entities from scientific explanation. We saw that there is a consensus among philosophers about the importance of the role of causal factors in the explanation of events, but naturalism excludes the supernatural from explanations generally. So according to naturalism, supernatural entities cannot play any causal role in the natural world, otherwise it would not be reasonable to totally exclude them. This conclusion was expressed by a strong version of the causal closure principle, according to which supernatural entities have no causal role in the natural world, neither as a chain in the causal history of physical events, nor as a part of a necessary condition at any level at any time. A long conclusion here. Methodological naturalism implies evidentialism, which obligates us to base the justification of our beliefs upon empirical evidence, and at the same time, since supernatural entities are causally isolated from that natural world, it is impossible for them to be reflected in the empirical evidence. As a result, someone who accepts methodological naturalism has to deny the existence of the supernatural and commit to metaphysical naturalism. Our argument contrasts with Forrest, who emphasizes that the relation between methodological and metaphysical naturalism is a posteriori, meaning that when a naturalistic methodology is used, the knowledge obtained will represent a naturalistic worldview. Contrary to Forrest, we showed that by analyzing the presuppositions of methodological naturalism, a methodological naturalist is rationally entitled to accept metaphysical naturalism. In other words, we have demonstrated that there is a deep conceptual relation between these two theses. Whereas Forrest tries to affirm metaphysical naturalism by referring to the success of methodological naturalism, we have argued that without acceptance of metaphysical naturalism, methodological naturalism fails to be a credible methodology. The core of this argument is the recognition that the causal closure principle is the link between methodological and metaphysical naturalism. For this principle at once assumes the causal isolation of the natural world, compels us to adopt a naturalistic methodology for discovering the world, and discredits our belief about the supernatural. And the biggest word that concerns me in this whole thing is this assumption right there. It does assume this. Now, this is a certain view about causality, and that's why at the very start I said I have a problem with these claims because they're dogmatic. I'm not entirely sure how you would get a causal closure principle unless you already assumed something like one. And then once you already have a causal closure principle in mind, as the sort of methodological naturalist is wont to do, but not necessarily needs to do, you see, I'm not sold that the methodological naturalist needs to have causal closure. A lot of time was given to arguing that people assume this, but that doesn't actually mean that you need to do it. Let's see, where were we? Yeah, see, there was arguing on the received view. Now, I will grant that the received view is according to as the authors here state. So there is no problem, I think, with the way they're arguing. If you accept the causal structure in that they are describing the causal roles and how it works, then they may have a good point. I'd have to look a little bit more closely, that you're going to have some metaphysical commitments because of the causal closure principle, because the causal closure principle will separate out metaphysical from the, not metaphysical, supernatural from the natural, excuse me. And so it's going to be it'll be a filter. It'll filter out everything that isn't one way or the other. But the problem is, of course, assuming the filter, it will filter out all the causally connected chains. But again, the question when they said, well, what's natural and what isn't, according to the uniformity of nature, exactly what gets sorted into the supernatural and natural according to this principle here. And this is the problem. This here is not very clear how we sort things into one or the other. This uniformity claim. So how things are judged to be how we view them, perceptual beliefs and their entailments, and what the uniformity of using them is not clear. Other than that, even though that these are relatively, I think, accepted sort of positions in the field, that is these are reasonable assumptions for this paper to make, so I don't think there's any big problem except me being a curmudgeon. Other than that, that's it for today, or this morning. I'll probably be back later, and I hope you enjoyed this paper, and maybe we'll do like a video one of these days. We'll watch a movie and we'll discuss in the chat, and that might be fun according to some of the feedback today. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Stay safe, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.